Hello and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Luke DeWolf.
And I'm Dan Larrabee.
Tonight, this is going to be episode 11 of the Northern Myths podcast, and we're continuing our series on the Kalevala, the epic national poem of Finland. How's it going, Dan?
Oh, I'm good, Luke. How are you?
Not bad at all. This should be a good one. We're finishing off the first poem of the Kalevala Runo 1. And so we're going to be going back to essentially a state of creation, and the land is all in chaos. There's really only water, and there's this first goddess, Ilmatar, the water mother, and so we're just going to be finishing that off for today.
So by the end of it, I think the world will have been created.
Yeah, let's see, huh?
Yeah.
And for today, since again we're using the translation by W.F. Kirby, but there are plenty of good translations out there. We picked this one because it's free, it's in the public domain, but it's also very readable. It's somewhat modern. It's certainly not as archaic as the earliest translation that there is available, but any translation that you can get your hands on, definitely follow along with us. We'll post a link to the Amazon page for a free Kindle edition, free at least at the time of this recording, so you can follow along for free with us if you like. And since we're using this free public domain translation, we're free to read as much of it as we want at a time here. So I'm just going to recap actually the last episode for us so that we are all back on the same page and we got the story fresh in our mind.
Sounds good.
And I'm not going to be starting right at the beginning of Runo 1. That was sort of a prologue. I'm going to be starting when the story's getting into it, so that's going to be line 103. So if you're following along, that's where we're going to give it a start. Okay. I have often heard related, and have heard the song recited, how the nights closed ever lonely, and the days were shining lonely. Only born was Väinämöinen, and revealed the bard immortal, sprung from the divine creatrix, born of Ilmatar, his mother. Air's young daughter was a virgin, fairest daughter of creation. Long did she abide a virgin, all the long days of her girlhood, in the air's own spacious mansions in those far extending regions. Wearily the time passed ever, and her life became a burden, dwelling evermore so lonely, always living as a maiden, in the air's own spacious mansions, in those far extending deserts. After this the maid descending, sank upon the tossing billows, on the open ocean's surface, on the wide expanse of water. Then a storm arose in fury, from the east a mighty tempest, and the sea was wildly foaming, and the waves dashed ever higher. Thus the tempest rocked the virgin, and the billows drove the maiden, o'er the ocean's azure surface on the crest of foaming billows, till the wind that blew around her and the sea woke life within her. Then she bore her heavy burden and the pain it brought upon her, 7 long centuries together, 9 times longer than a lifetime. Yet no child was fashioned from her, and no offspring was perfected. Thus she swam the water mother, east she swam and westward swam she, swam to northwest and to southwest, and around in all directions, in the sharpness of her torment, in her body's fearful anguish. Yet no child was fashioned from her, and no offspring was perfected. Then she fell to weeping gently, and in words like these expressed her, "Oh, how wretched is my fortune, wandering thus a child unhappy. I have wandered far already, and I dwell beneath the heaven, by the tempest tossed forever, while the billows drive me onward, o'er this wide expanse of water, on the far extending billows. Better were it had I tarried, virgin in aerial regions, then I should not drift forever as the mother of the waters. Here my life is cold and dreary, every moment now is painful, ever tossing on the billows, ever floating on the water. Ukko, thou of gods the highest, ruler of the whole of heaven, hasten here, for thou art needed. Hasten here at my entreaty. Free the damsel from her burden, and release her from her tortures. Quickly, haste, and yet more quickly, where I long for thee so sorely. And that's where we left off.
That's where we left off. And I think what we're seeing is a very typical creation story with, a goddess or a divine feminine figure immersed in water, which is also usually associated with the divine feminine, as well as sort of that, pre-cosmogonic chaos. And
my favorite word.
His favorite word. and she's swimming in it, and she's a virgin, which is actually kind of important because it means it denotes a sense of immaturity, that she's unconscious. And you can see the pain being unconscious causes her, and how badly she's struggling against the chaos to become conscious. And, even crying out to Ukko, who, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would be a male god, and thus offering sort of a waking up her consciousness and giving her a child and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's the symbolism again. I think I mentioned this in the last episode. The symbolism is really tight. Like, I guess Elias Lönnrot really knew what he was going for. He understood the symbolism well, so it all really coalesces and makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. And just for a little bit of a background on the history here, just a recap of the history, Elias Lönnrot. So he went and compiled the Kalevala, and he went and journeyed through mostly what is now eastern Finland and far western Russia, the Karelia Oblast of Russia, and as well as the Baltic countries, especially Estonia. What is Estonia these days? And he just went and collected these poems from wherever, anyone who was singing them, who knew them. And if you check out our Instagram, we got a great picture of a couple of I guess you would just old men who knew these songs, and they would hold hands and they would sing it together, and it's really, really quite cool. So
it's a great picture. I think they're brothers even.
Yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, they're just from eastern Finland, where much more rural. The western part would have been more what the Swedes would have kind of inhabited there. The ruling class sort of thing, much more urban, but out into the rural areas of Finland, and especially in the east, it was a lot more of a folkloric society and all that.
For sure. And something that was interesting that because after the episode, I went and read up on Elias. I'm on first name basis with him now because we're good friends. He went on like 12 expeditions and gathered, I think, like thousands of poems and stories, and then was able to sort of glean from the different variations, sort of the most common factors. So it actually is like a compilation of sort of the most common stories. And the thing that really surprised me and got me thinking was that when he was going around Finland, people were like super excited when he came into town because he was going to be able to bring them stories that they hadn't heard before, and they were going to be able to share stories that he hadn't heard before. And so it was basically like this big like party. Like, just imagine, well, I mean, he actually talks about not drinking and telling the stories, but I imagine there was a fair amount of festivities around it, and like, after a hard day of work in the field kind of thing, go and, have drinks with your friends and neighbors and tell these old stories. Like, that just sounds so awesome to me. Like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think it might not have been him, but it would make sense if it was him. But I think tons more of these poems are archived in Finland. Like, it's not like the only ones that survived are the ones that are in the Kalevala. It would make sense if it was him. I don't know that completely for sure, but I think it must have been either him or someone else who compiled like all of these stories. And then Lönnrot certainly compiled all this into Kalevala and made it into kind of this cohesive story. And that's why I think the symbolism is just so bang on, because it's like he was able to take everything and really merge it all together, find the similarities. And if you've been following our show for a little while, or if you're familiar with the work of Jung or Campbell or Dr. Jordan Peterson, the synthesis of all of these stories, what the common elements is what becomes the archetypes, right? And so that's what's this archetypal symbolism. I think it completely makes sense as this is what's left,
Exactly. Yeah, and I know that this poem, it's the national poem of Finland, and it inspired sort of Finnish national pride to sort of break away from Russian rule and Swedish rule?
Yeah, Swedish before Russian rule. It was 1849, I think, was the end of the war between Sweden and Russia. And I guess the main thing that was transferred between them for Russia winning was Finland. So they got a buffer between themselves and Sweden, essentially. Yeah, all this nice geopolitics. But Finland finally became independent at the end of the Bolshevik Revolution. There was a small civil war, actually, in 1917. A small war to break away from Russia, but I might be getting that wrong, but definitely there was a civil war between essentially those loyal to the communists and those loyal to non-communists. I think that was really what the binary was. You were either communist or you weren't, and it was the non-communists who won. I think it was the whites and the reds, and the whites won. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, and I'm actually incorrect. But and speaking of that, I do want to make a small correction. I forgot about that at the beginning of. I implied that so there's Kalevala, the Finnish national epic, and then there is an Estonian national epic, and I implied that it was quite similar. So the Estonian national epic is called Kalevipoeg, which means son of Kalev. It doesn't, I believe it is not connected to the word Kalevala, or the word that became Kalevala. And so that similarity on the surface as far as the names, the stories are in fact distinct and different, but they are the same type of poetry, the same sort of verse structure. If you go and you look at Kalevala in the original Finnish and Kalevipoeg in the Estonian, it's probably going to look like a whole bunch of gobbledygook, but hopefully you can pick out that it looks like it's following the same kind of patterns, and that's because it is. And there is some structural similarity as well, as far as the eternal story of going, not to spoil anything, but going down to the underworld and a few other things. So it's not like they're identical, but they were from similar sources. And I believe Lönnrot, since he went down into Estonia as well, he would have heard some of those same stories too. So that was the point I was trying to make. I was not trying to imply that they are essentially the same story. So just that correction there.
Fair enough.
And maybe just one other point I have on, you were touching on, Dan, the whole national independence movement and things like that. There were others that were kind of involved in this as well. Just sort of as a point of interest here, others who were heavily involved. There were artists, painters. One is Aleksi Gallen-Kallela, if I'm getting that right, who has some beautiful paintings inspired by Kalevala. Another was Jan Sibelius, the most famous Finnish composer. He lived a little bit later, but his music, a lot of it was heavily inspired by Kalevala. And so if you want to look at a few other things that were from roughly the same time period and were just really cool, those would be a couple that would be interesting to take a look at. And Sibelius wrote this little 7 to 9 minute little piece that eventually ended up becoming called Finlandia, the Finlandia Suite, and it is sort of the de facto national anthem of Finland. It's not officially, but it's considered an unofficial national anthem, and it's a really, really cool little piece there. So just for interest's sake, a few other things that were related to this period of time, and all of this contributed to kind of the building up of a national spirit in Finland. So.
Definitely, and I think I remember reading too that the Russians didn't like the Kalevala, and they didn't like Finlandia either. But there wasn't really a way to squash them, because they were just these stories and this music that sort of depended on your own interpretation. So they didn't like it because they knew what the end result was going to be, was this, the swelling of national pride, but they weren't able to stop it. So
Yeah,
I find that interesting.
Well, yeah, exactly, and I think this is an example of how nationalism can have like a positive effect. Is really these movements where sort of a distinct people says, yeah, we actually would like to have some independence. So, like, I mean, I think a lot of people can just get behind that. Where it's like you want the right to determine your future and not be under the thumb of some other group, right? Like I think Kosovo is a recent example, right, where they didn't want to be a part of Serbia. Like it's all kind of the same thing, and it contributed to Finland having enough cohesion that they were able to survive World War II, which they were getting attacked by Russia from all sides. They eventually ended up having the burden of being associated with the Axis at the end there because they had to get help from Germany in order to even survive by the end there, but they paid off their debts. They were like the first country to pay off all of their war debts from World War II, and yeah, they really stuck it out with a real Finnish spirit, and that's actually a concept called sisu, it's like a uniquely Finnish word where it's like this is the national spirit of the people, and I think this all kind of came from here. So the roots run deep is sort of more what I'm getting at there.
Definitely, and it just shows you the power of story, and we talked about this in the first episode too, because the prologue is basically Elias just going on about how important it is to tell these stories, but it really shows you that it isn't just it's not just lip service saying like, oh, these stories were important. No, they actually had an impact, and it's sort of. That's why we have that saying, the pen is mightier than the sword, that if you can inspire people with the writing, then it's like far more powerful than anything you as an individual could do with a sword. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, to this day, Finland is one of the greatest places to live. They're widely considered the best country in the world as far as education goes. And I mean, they're like any other country. They've had hard times with their economy and things like that, but still just a lovely place to live. And, I think it all just comes back to something like this. It's a group of people who have this identity together, so I think that's pretty cool. And maybe we're losing that, in the West a little bit, like kind of losing that identity somehow.
Yeah, sort of. I blame the sort of the hyper individualistic. I mean, individualism is not bad by any stretch, but just like anything, you can have too much of it. So that if you and your neighbor have nothing in common because you're so individualistic, then how do you actually live together and face anything? So
yeah, and I mean, end of the day, that's I think why I enjoyed reading these stories and learning about this. Like again, I'm not Finnish or anything, but it's still really amazing to see like these old stories that have been told for hundreds, thousands of years and are still here today. We still kind of can get something out of it, and yeah, I think that's why we do this.
Definitely.
I'm ready to move on, and we're all kind of recapped here.
Yeah, I feel sufficiently recapped, so...
Good. And so Ilmatar has prayed to the god Ukko to come and save her from floating around in the water. She's being fertilized by the chaotic waves, but no baby yet, so no child was perfected. So here we go. This took us all the way to line 177, and so we're going to be starting up at 178. I think I'm going to go, two rough, I don't know what you call them, verses. They have sentence breaks in our translations, 3, I guess, here. So, yeah, going all the way to line 194. Back to the poem. Short the time that passed thereafter. Scarce a moment had passed over, ere a beauteous teal came flying, lightly hovering o'er the water. Seeking for a spot to rest in, searching for a home to dwell in. Eastward flew she, westward flew she, flew to northwest and to southward. But the place she sought she found not a spot, however barren, where her nest she could establish, or a resting place could light on. Then she hovered slowly moving, and she pondered and reflected. If my nest in wind I stablish, or should rest it on the billows, then the winds will overturn it, or the waves will drift it from me.
This is awesome. So I'll talk first about the teal, which I actually had to look up. It's a duck, and the reason why it's named teal is it has a teal ring around its eyes, which is, I mean, ducks are actually like quite beautiful birds, like on their own, but this sounds particularly beauteous, which is I really like the use of that word as well. So what I kind of see happening here is air has made the prayer to Ukko, and I was thinking about this for a long time, and it seems to me praying is a way of realigning yourself with the highest goal, the highest good. And so even while she's being tossed around in the waves and nothing is really happening and she's getting frustrated, by praying, she's kind of able to focus on the highest good and to kind of give herself a lifeline. There's that idea that, God helps those who help themselves. And I think this is actually a case of that where she's directing herself to the highest good that she can fathom, which is Ukko. And then because of that, you have this duck of all things fly into the scene, and it's flying around, obviously looking for a place to nest. And we're still we don't know what's going to happen yet, but it seems to me that it's an opportunity that has arisen for air, and that it's exactly right, because when you do focus on the highest good, opportunities present themselves. And I think, actually, I'll talk about this too with the duck. I was trying to think, like, why a duck? Because ducks aren't that, I mean, they're beautiful birds, but there's no like great legends about ducks or anything like that. They're not fearsome creatures, but they do fly. They do swim, and they do waddle around on the ground, and they're pretty comfortable in all of these areas. And it struck me that it shows me that they're able to exist in the chaos. They're able to ride it out. They can be in like the barren area of the air, and then they can also exist sort of in a structured environment on land. And when they're looking to nest as well, they're looking for the structured area, the known area. They can't do it in chaos or in a place that's barren, which I think really speaks to, well, just one, like humans need that. We need shelter. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, like shelter, food, that kind of thing, there needs to be a known area that's protected, it's sheltered, so that you can grow and then go explore the unknown areas and the barren areas and all that kind of stuff. So I almost see the duck as an example for air as how you should behave in the world, and that you do have your home base, but then you should be able to exist in chaos and in the air. Well, like with ducks, even in English, we have that saying, trouble rolls off them like water off a duck's back, and it's very true if you've ever seen a duck. Well, actually, this is interesting too. When ducks are eating, they dive down and then grab whatever they're going to eat and come back up above the water. So they're literally diving down into the chaos for nourishment. And then the water just beads, like they're not ever wet. It's kind of weird. But that's kind of how we should be in chaos. We should be able to move in chaos so masterfully that, like, once we get out of it, we're dry and we're not messed up by it.
Interesting. Well, okay. So the appropriateness of the duck there. I mean, first of all, that was the first place that I went was, okay, why a duck, right? And I mean, I think so. I think you touched on most of the points that I kind of was looking at. I like what you're getting at as far as it's at home in, first of all, the chaos. It's waterfowl, like it's the definition, right? And then it's also, it can fly, so it's home in the air, which it takes on a different symbolic tone here compared to, say, Norse mythology, where it's got sort of like, eagles flying above sort of thing, and it's more of a freedom thing. Here they kind of imply this sterility. There's not a lot going on in the air compared to on the water, right? And then it's able to exist on land as well. And so I mean, and then it's looking for a place to nest. So it's kind of in a similar position to Ilmatar, right? So it's in a similar position to her in the sense that they both want to, they want to reproduce, which is, a very, very basic human drive in general, and certainly a feminine thing symbolically. The concept of creation in general, that comes from chaos. It's really the positive side of chaos. The most positive part of chaos is creation, and I mean that's the eternal mystery, right? How creation ever happens, and these are two beings that want to have some creation take place, and it's almost like neither one is able to do anything. And I mean, I don't want to skip ahead here, but that's sort of their situation currently. Does that make any sense? This is really, I'm sort of grasping at straws on this one.
No, I think you're right, because I definitely took there to be a meaning that the duck was kind of a mirror for Ilmatar, that she could actually kind of use the duck as an example of, here's this duck that's in my position, and I'm kind of weeping and gnashing my teeth, and like I'm like upset by my position, but the duck is sort of calmly and effortlessly searching for the solution. So
interesting. That's really cool. And I think that makes sense here. Yeah. Okay. And, okay. So the only other point I'm going to make here, and this is sort of going to derail us a little bit.
Awesome.
Not too far, but it's actually just, sort of an aside. It's more like what ended up making it into the Kalevala was a symbol that this is a duck, and it is going to be, and it's in the story with Ilmatar. But in other original folk poems, and the only reason I know about this is there was a source that I found from like a Finnish book from the 1950s, and my Finnish is not that good. So I can't confirm this overly here. Well, and I definitely can't confirm it if I can't find the original book. I just saw that it existed. But in some of the original folk poems, they say that it was actually an eagle. So first of all, that's already, that goes into a different place symbolically, and that it was with Väinämöinen, that this was actually significantly later in the story when this happened, and it wasn't with Ilmatar. So that fully changes the story. It changes it completely. And I don't want to derail us here. My only point is that this is some alternate interpretation or an alternative version of the story that developed in some other tribe sort of thing. And for whatever reason, that wasn't the version that made it into the Kalevala. But, eagle takes us to a different place symbolically, right?
Absolutely. No, that's very interesting that other versions have it as an eagle. I'd have to sit and think about that for a bit and see what that could mean.
Right. And I think the only parallel I would draw between that and Norse mythology is just in general, eagle being a symbolism for some combination of freedom, and it's an apex predator. It's kind of at the top. To me, that just says it's at the top of the world tree as well as the top of Valhalla, right? Symbols of eagles are at the top of the doors, right? And so my only thought there is it's just, again, kind of a symbol of the highest good, of kind of an ideal that you can aim for, which I think would, again, sort of make sense as far as here is something that you can aim for, what Ilmatar can aim for. And so, I mean, if we take this, because we've had this before where there's different versions of a story, right? Especially the Baldur story a little bit. But in this case, I think we can kind of synthesize these two sides of it into sort of, this is an example. I really like that interpretation that you had there, Dan. So
Yeah, and I'm thinking too, when we think of eagles, we're thinking like bald eagles and stuff like that. But there are like birds of prey that like get fish out of the ocean, like seahawks and stuff like that. If they, maybe the translation for that is eagle for us, but it's actually like a seahawk type thing that for them. So, which they would also have like that waterproof feathering and all that kind of stuff. So it would be, there's definitely like synthesis here that you can draw that, again, it's something to look up to and be inspired by, and to, if this duck can do it, or if this eagle can exist in this area, well, maybe I can too, and then go from there.
Yeah. And the other side of it, with it being related to Väinämöinen, and I don't know if this is necessarily like it's always an eagle if it's Väinämöinen or whatever. I think this is just alternative versions that could be one or the other, something like that. I don't know. I personally like how this version of the story is going to go. There's sort of a different implication if it's a masculine character versus a feminine character doing what comes next. Not to get ahead of ourselves at all, but I like the interpretation in the Kalevala, and maybe we can lightly touch on what the difference would be once we're there. But I like the implication of it being a feminine figure in this particular case. That's kind of all I have, and I think we're at a good spot to move on.
Definitely.
Okay. Back to the poem. 195 to 212. Then the mother of the waters, water mother, made aerial, from the waves her knee uplifted, raised her shoulder from the billows, that the teal her nest might stablish, and might find a peaceful dwelling. Then the teal, the bird so beauteous, hovered slow and gazed around her, and she saw the knee uplifted from the blue waves of the ocean, and she thought she saw a hillock, freshly green with springing verdure. There she flew and hovered slowly, gently on the knee alighting, and her nest she there established, and she laid her eggs all golden. 6 gold eggs she laid within it, and a 7th she laid of iron.
So the first thing I see here is that, thankfully, Ilmatar saw the opportunity that was being presented to her and took advantage of it. She could have just as easily kept splashing around in the water and kind of said, like, what's this dumb bird here doing? Teasing me with its flying and all this kind of stuff. But no, she recognized the opportunity that was presented, and then created space for the teal to come down and lay eggs. So in a very real way, like, she's using her own body to create order in this vast sea of chaos so that life can spring up.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the language you use there. This really, to me, draws parallels with pregnancy in general. Like, this is all the women, everyone has a mother, right? Like, all the women you've known who have ever had kids or whatever, like, this is what they're doing. They're giving up their body to create something out of essentially nothing, out of this mysterious, whatever that happens for a baby to be made, and I just can't help but draw some sort of a parallel here, and maybe how it's sort of like there is an intentionality to it here, where Ilmatar is just going like, okay, like, here I'm going to give up my body here so that this bird, this duck, can lay its eggs and sort of get its fertility taken care of, right? So it can reproduce, create, I can't help but draw a parallel there. And I think this even sort of goes towards some Earth Mother imagery as well, sort of, right? So because it's sort of, well, just the fertility image in general is often, the Mother Earth, right? That's a symbol that we have these days, and that was sort of a literal thing. The concept of the earth was assimilated to that of a mother or of a fertility goddess, and that's a really old idea. And I think I see bits of that here, just in especially the intentional decision to go and give up her knee in this case, which, sounds benign, but
still, it's part of her body, and she's not going to be able to use that knee until, the eggs have hatched and, the little ducklings have figured out how to swim and fly and all that kind of stuff. So, no, I really like your point about this being like sort of the idea of the Earth Mother and motherhood. I absolutely see that.
Well, and then like maybe I think the nuance I'm trying to get at here is sort of like this is the intentional decision to go and have that be a part of that creation, right? Because I mean, I know plenty of women who don't want kids, sort of thing, and if that's the situation, and you don't really want to go, and guys too. Just I'm not going to discriminate here, but the ladies are the ones who actually have to be pregnant and all that, and generally are the ones who become more attached to the children. And in fact, I mean, there's some idea that women might be essentially biologically configured to be bonded to a small child, sort of thing.
For
right?
sure.
And so I think if you don't want to, if you don't have that intentionality and stuff, there can be negative consequences, right? For kids kind of in that situation where, the mother doesn't necessarily want to have those kids, and maybe that's one of those things that creates a toxic environment, sort of thing, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it would be a kind of a horror show after that.
I'm not saying that's always happens or that's even all that common. It's just I think that's something that's even in popular culture or something like that is just a thing that we know in general happens sometimes, and maybe my point is just like if you go into it intentionally and this is really what you want, I think that has a better potential. There's always an important factor of having that intention, that positive intention of wanting to have that creation.
Definitely. Just imagine growing up and then finding out like your mom actually didn't want you. Like, and not even like, oh, you were an accident. Because there's a big difference between not being planned and then being like, yeah, you know what? I think things would have been better off if I just didn't have you. Like, one's like a happy accident. Yay, surprise. The other one's like, oh crap, I need therapy now. Right.
And I mean, to be clear, there's definitely, it's common even where it's like you just get a surprise and then it becomes, the greatest thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I'm just saying this is sort of something in our cultural, hive mind or collective unconscious or something like that. Right. So no, that was sort of what I got out of this is that she's intentionally being a part of this creation. And maybe there's something too. It's not necessarily hers per se, but it also parallels. She's having trouble getting her baby out of her, sort of thing. So I think it's all kind of related there, right?
Definitely. Actually, I was gonna mention this and forgot, but just remembered there is an idea that when you're kind of swimming in chaos and don't know what to do and things aren't really going your way, that helping others can really like help drag you out of it and give you direction. And that was one thing that I saw in here, that she's selflessly helping this bird. And well, I mean, as we read on, you'll see that it actually does kind of help her drag her out of the chaos and into a path that she can finally go down. Nice.
Yeah, I like that. I do have a point about the eggs here, but this might be a little bit better after the next one.
Okay, sounds good. Okay.
Back to the poem. This is, I believe, 213 to 244. Yeah. Okay. Back to the poem. O'er her eggs the teal sat brooding, and the knee grew warm beneath her. And she sat one day, a second, brooded also on the third day. Then the mother of the waters, water mother, maid aerial, felt it hot, and felt it hotter, and she felt her skin was heated, till she thought her knee was burning, and that all her veins were melting. Then she jerked her knee with quickness, and her limbs convulsive shaking rolled the eggs into the water, down amid the waves of ocean. And to splinters they were broken, and to fragments they were shattered. In the ooze they were not wasted, nor the fragments in the water, but a wondrous change came over them, and the fragments grew all lovely. From the cracked egg's lower fragment, now the solid earth was fashioned. From the cracked egg's upper fragment rose the lofty arch of heaven. From the yolk, the upper portion, now became the sun's bright luster. From the white, the upper portion, rose the moon that shines so brightly. Whatso in the egg was mottled, now became the stars in heaven. Whatso in the egg was blackish, in the air as cloudlets floated. And I just realized I went a bit too far, but that's okay. We can
figure that out.
Yeah.
So, at first glance, it's kind of like a scary thing where, she made this nice home for the duck, and then, things got too hot and uncomfortable, and, she rolls the eggs into the ocean. And, like, at first, you're like, oh my God, like, what are we going to do with the eggs? But then we see the eggs, creating the world and being the actual stuff that is used to create the world. And I think, the egg itself is a great symbol for this because it's really nothing but potential. Whether it's fertilized and, a chick hatches out of it and, becomes a chicken or whatever bird you want, or it's unfertilized and you eat it. And it's because like eggs are packed with nutrients and, it's often called like one of the perfect foods because everything in it like works together and is super healthy for you. So it's a great symbol of, I'd say, potential and even prosperity. I mean, if you've got a hen that's laying eggs, I mean, you've got food and a continuous source of food as long as it's laying eggs. So it's a great symbol for this as the stuff that's going to make the world and to kind of bring. Well, it's also bringing order out of chaos because they're quite literally destroyed, but out of their destruction, this order, this beautiful new creation comes out of it. So it's like, I mean, it's a cliche to say, but it's a cliche for a reason that, you have to destroy things to create things. And you might think, well, like, what does that actually mean? Well, even with, like if you're painting or something, you're taking an easel that's blank and then like making it not blank. And you're destroying that easel as it was, like sort of its previous incarnation. And then the paint and stuff like that, if you see like a painter's palette, like, if you watch like Bob Ross or whatever, like it's a mess by the end. Like it was pristine and then that cleanliness and that pristine nature of it is gone, but you have this beautiful creation in front of you. So, I'm going to use I guess you can't make an omelet if you don't crack some eggs.
There we go. had to have some of that, right? No, perfect. No, this is a big one. I think I wanted to split it a little bit earlier, just because obviously this creation bit is so huge. I wanna step back just for a second here, back even to the previous bit. So 6 gold eggs were laid in a 7th of iron. So the point I had here, iron versus gold. So there's some medieval ideas about this where iron was almost seen as an imperfect metal, where more time inside of the earth might have actually turned it to gold. And the goal of alchemy, as I understand it, and this is mostly from some work by Mircea Eliade, that's where I'm getting this from, is that the idea is that if you can take this iron and turn it into gold, you're actually performing the function of the earth and essentially just perfecting what would have taken time in the earth. So my point here is maybe that some of them are gold, but a 7th is iron. It's sort of that it's not perfected yet. It's not fully ordered yet. They're not all golden. They're not all perfect. There's still something left to do there. And I almost want to leave that open-ended just because that leads to there's potential here. Not just potential of the egg, but also potential in the form of the egg, where it's like we've got 6 that are golden, but also a 7th, which is you could even go as far as saying impure or not exactly perfect, right? Which I hesitate to say I hope this isn't implying something like original sin sort of thing here. We do have the problem with Elias Lönnrot where I say problem, where he is certainly a devout Christian and does insert some of that symbolism into these stories here, but he was much better than, say, for example, Snorri Sturluson, who had to make up this whole story about how the Norse gods were actually from Troy and all this stuff. But he's much better. Lönnrot is much better. We will see some specific examples of Christian influence, and it's very, very clear. I hesitate to say this could be something like that, but I could also see some other things here as far as the potential of the world that is to come out of these eggs, something like that. The presence of these so-called impure elements, it's not done.
For sure. It might also be just the idea that there's always like a touch of chaotic potential to everything, the snake in the garden, or the iron and the gold and eggs, So I don't know, like if we will see sort of a resolution to that, but I'm going to keep my eyes open for what that could come to. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think the idea of the cosmic smith is a related idea here. I'm getting this from Eliade, where it's like these are even just the blacksmith in general is considered to be kind of holy or sacred because they are performing this function that the earth, which is this fertility figure, this mother type figure, would be doing naturally. So you're performing a holy function or a sacred function by hastening this natural function, right? And so then that turns into the idea of cosmic smith, which there's examples in Norse, but there's definitely examples in the Kalevala here that we'll see again. So yeah, maybe that's going to be something that we kind of hit on. I don't actually know. I don't have all the details like
for sure
right at the front of my mind, but
yeah, well, I'll keep my eyes open for it. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and then obviously just the rest of this here, like there's the eggs are getting hotter. The only point I might have had on that is that it's sort of like this is almost like a concept of physics. Like if you're getting hot, you're literally like there's motion. There's the particles that are in there are in greater motion, and something's happening, right? Like I don't know. Do eggs necessarily actually get hot? They might. I don't know anything about that.
They need to be kept warm. That's why the duck would be sitting on the eggs, and in farms you'll have like heat lamps and stuff like that, so that the chickens don't have to sit on them the whole time, kind of thing. Like so there's definitely a need for heat for eggs. Like that part is totally like sort of makes biological sense.
Well, sure, and then it turns into like I think that's the only connection I make there is that it's the potential is literally like it's in motion. You know what I mean? Literally.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So and then I mean obviously it's this moment that could be tragic, but then turns into something amazing. And this really turns into this is the symbol of the cosmic egg. That's the name given to this symbol by someone smarter than me, and but it's found in so many places. It's not universal per se, but this is found in the Vedic religion in India. This is found in Greece. This is found in China. There's Taoist ideas that relate to this cosmic egg.
Egypt,
absolutely. Phoenician as well, related. Semitic. I use that in the technical term, like they spoke Semitic languages and all that. Just saying. But yeah, it's always the same theme where the lower part is the earth, the upper part is the sky. We go into a little more detail here where it's like these bits are the clouds, these bits are the sun, the moon, but
stars, yeah.
Yeah, but it's always the same thing where it's like it's the egg, and so there's something to this symbol where it's like this is almost a universal. I won't use that term lightly. It's not found in every single culture necessarily, but it's also like widespread across large cultural groupings,
Definitely.
So that's just a really, really interesting thing there. And then what's interesting, I think there's also something to this being like, I think it implies that the eggs are fertile, first of all, but then it also has to come into contact with chaos, right? It literally has to come into contact with a pre-cosmogonic chaos to realize its true form. And we're not going to see the teal again. The teal might be like just really unhappy here, but I doubt it. I would figure if the teal's sticking around, it's seeing that something really good came out of the choices it made and creating something. You know,
definitely. For all we know so far, this might have actually been the point, was to create this land. Maybe the teal. I'm assuming that the teal was sent by Ukko, and that, of course, this is, Ilmatar was probably thinking, I'm going to have a child or whatever, never expecting wow, the earth is going to be formed and all this kind of stuff. So I'm looking at this as kind of like a prayers answered bird. So that the duck fully expected that this is what was going to happen.
Sure. And I mean, taking that as just an abstract here, I mean, I actually have a little bit of a, maybe some cognitive dissonance there, as far as, if prayer is this thing that aligns you to the highest good, and then something just happens that, solves your problems necessarily, I don't want to say that's coincidence, but I also don't want to necessarily go around thinking that all I have to do is align myself and then good things are going to happen to me. I think that conflicts with the idea that, at the very minimum, you have to make what you can out of your world. And I don't want it almost doesn't make sense to me that the world would work like this, where it's like you pray and then the prayer is definitely going to be answered. You know what I mean? And it's not like that's implying this, but it's still sort of the concept of prayer in general.
For sure. And that's why I think when we're actually talking about Ilmatar purposefully letting the duck come down and rest on her knee, that to me was almost opening her eyes to opportunity, like that was being presented to her, and then she took advantage of it. So, and it's like when you point yourself to the highest good, and you're actually doing it, and you're not just sort of spouting off about it. I would say that opportunities present themselves not because you're getting these, divine gifts or whatever, but that these opportunities actually were always there, but because you're actually looking for them now you're seeing them. And I think that might be what is happening here.
Sure. Interesting. I like that a lot. That clears some of that up for me, actually. So that's good. It's like the opportunities are there. You're just not looking for them. And by aligning yourself to that, you look for them and you take advantage of them is the implication, right?
Exactly. I know Pearson talks about look, when you aim at the highest good, invisible doors open for you, but he does talk about being ready to take advantage of opportunities when they arise, so that and I think they're just invisible to you until you actually start looking for them.
And then you have to take the step of going
exactly through them.
Yeah. All right. That, I think that's good for me there, even though, I mean, do you have any more on the creation of the world or anything like that? That's a big one.
The only other thought I had that I think I'll mention, and it's not like a huge one or anything, when they were talking about the heat and her knee burning and veins melting, it kind of reminded me of the descriptions of volcanoes in the Voluspa. And so the convulsively shaking land. I thought maybe that this idea might have come from an ancient volcanic eruption kind of thing, or I'm not sure where scientists have sort of landed on how life was created on Earth, but I know that when it was created on Earth, there was water and everything, but there also was a lot of volcanoes and that kind of thing. And it was ooze that first was there. I'm not sure. I've always wondered, and if anyone can explain this to me, that'd be awesome. I've always wondered how sort of inert things like came together to become alive. Like I don't know how that works. I actually don't think we know how that works, but this is always one of those mysteries where I was like, how did that happen? Does anyone have an answer for that? So if anyone knows like evolution, feel free to let us know, because I'm quite curious to find out.
Yeah, that's definitely well out of my wheelhouse too.
Yeah.
So please do that. That reminds me of the cosmic egg symbolism. The parallel that I believe is being drawn kind of scientifically is that's a semi-technical. No, that's wrong. It's one of the better symbols for what is being known technically as the Big Bang. It's almost like as like I forget if it's like what's immediately after that, but it's like the what even I think some scientists use to describe the state the universe was in before the Big Bang, before all that potential came out of it. So there's something to this symbol that was even reflected in modern science as a really simple symbol that can be used to explain this stuff anyway to the layperson, I think. Yeah.
Which we are, the layperson.
Exactly. No, lots of really cool things there. Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this is going to be, where are we now? 245. Yeah, starting at 245. And just a little short one here to about 254. So, back to the poem. Now the time passed quickly over, and the years rolled quickly onward, in the new sun's shining luster, and the new moon's softer beaming. Still the water mother floated, water mother, made aerial, ever on the peaceful waters, on the billow's foamy surface, with the moving waves before her, and the heaven serene behind her.
So we have this lovely image of a new world, and I think we see a movement from prehistory into history, at least like, Earth history, and that it's still like before animals and humans and all that kind of stuff. But now, we do have the sun and the moon. So now like days are happening now, and there's time, and it's sort of this beautiful world. It's pristine. The waves are moving before her. Heaven is serene behind her. We're kind of in this. To me, it's almost like the Garden of Eden before even Adam and Eve were there. It's just this creation in all its glory, and everything has a place, and it's in its place and doing what it's supposed to be doing without any interference, without anything stopping it. And it's just this sort of beautiful state of existence for the world.
Yeah, and I think this is also implying a better state than before. Like it's the moving waves are ahead of her, the peaceful waters now. It's not stormy, and the heaven is behind her. I think that directionally, that's almost implying like, okay, now she has moved beyond even thinking about the old place where she used to be, and now she's sort of got her eye ahead of her on the waters. And this is going to be important, what we're going to get at pretty quick here. But yeah, I think it implies just sort of a different circumstance where maybe she's more positive about what could be going on, and then we're obviously going to get to it. And I like your point about the sun and the moon and all the time and everything like that, because that's obviously critically important to human development, time kind of existing. I'm guessing that's one reason why you went to this, is sort of we're now getting into history as well, because, time is actually a thing.
Exactly.
Now. Yeah. So that's just a good point there for sure.
And I think too, there's sort of this idea, if she was unconscious before, she's conscious now. And it's sort of the first moments of consciousness where, she's seeing things as they actually are, and the chaos that she had to go through to get from unconscious to conscious is gone. And now it's the waves ahead of her but she's oriented and knows where she is in the world. And so she can move forward without that unknowing.
She can move forward now, and back to the poem, starting at 255 all the way to 280. When the 9th year had passed over, and the summer 10th was passing, from the sea her head she lifted, and her forehead she uplifted. And she then began creation, and she brought the world to order. On the open ocean's surface, on the far extending waters. Wheresoe'er her hand she pointed, there she formed the jutting headlands. Wheresoe'er her feet she rested, there she formed the caves for fishes. When she dived beneath the water, there she formed the depths of ocean. When towards the land she turned her, there the level shores extended. Where her feet to land extended, spots were formed for salmon netting. Where her head the land touched lightly, there the curving bays extended. Further from the land she floated, and abode in open water, and created rocks in ocean, and the reefs that eyes behold not, where the ships are often shattered, and the sailors' lives are ended.
So here we have it's just being explicitly said she is bringing the world to order. So making order out of chaos. And I love, there's a line that's just kind of, I don't think there's a lot of attention brought to it, but they say from the sea her head she lifted, and her forehead she uplifted. And like consciousness and like the head is like, those two symbols go together because that's where we assume consciousness is stored. Even though we actually don't know where it's stored. And that freaks me out. I don't like to think about that too much. But we don't know where it's held. But the power of ordering comes from the intellect. And I love how she's lifting her head and then seeing the world and then ordering it. Whereas before she was the one who was being tossed around by the oceans, and she had these feelings of despair, but now she's kind of clear-headed and able to look at the chaos and form it in the way exactly how she wants it. And I just love that, because I think that's exactly how it goes when you're facing chaos and you're trying to order it. There is often a lot of emotions around it, but once you're able to sort of get past that, you're able to see clearly. You're able to order things the way you want it, and you do need both, because you need that chaos to be there. So you do need that emotion in it, but to actually like fashion it into something useful, you need that intellect there to do it. So that's really what I got from this passage, that she's become conscious, and she's able to use that consciousness and that intellect to create the world.
Yeah, and I mean, creating the world, I mean, obviously that is gigantic symbolically, but even if you take that down to a micro level, she's just ordering the world around her in general, which, is something that you can take and apply to pretty well any situation. And I mean, that's effectively this isn't the hero's journey per se, but this is a big goal of the hero in general, the hero archetype, if you will, where it's like bringing order to chaos. That's the goal. And first of all, this is why I like this passage as being from Ilmatar's standpoint. A couple of reasons. One, first of all, I think she's intentionally shaping the world and making it into something ready for her child to be born into. One thing that my wife and I have had a discussion about is that we want to have kids in a situation where if we were kids, we would actually like to live here, have us as parents, sort of thing. And I think this is almost the same. This is like a similar idea, where it's like you're intentionally shaping the world so it's going to be good for your child to prosper, and then the other side of it, where it's a mother shaping the world around her. I think that it's one of those things that illustrates how the symbolic masculine and the symbolic feminine is just that, it's symbolic. And really Carl Jung's biggest thing was that the ultimate goal for both men and women is to integrate the other side, the other symbolic side into your life to be able to do that. So for men, it's to be able to integrate with chaos and destruction and sort of come to terms with it and creation and all that. And for women, I think here again, it's, to be able to shape the world around them. And I just like it because it illustrates that concept where it's like the symbolic masculine and feminine does not mean this is one thing for men, one thing for women. This is something that, no matter who you are, you can aspire to these things. And
actually, we'll see coming up that I really like what you just said about the symbolic masculine and feminine, the anima and the animus, because there isn't, as we're going to see in just a little bit, there isn't like a father figure for Väinämöinen. He's just kind of born, what they call it, like immaculate conception kind of thing. But I think that goes to your point that if she has integrated both the masculine and the feminine, as she seems to have in this, then you have the necessary components to create life.
Well, and I mean, aren't a lot of these creation figures also seen as being both masculine and feminine?
Absolutely.
Like, and not just symbolically, but male and female, they're described like that. I can't think of any examples off my head. I want to say the most recent examples I've read about it being like Hittite or Phoenician or something like that. I could be just making that up, but I know I've been reading about this. Definitely that's a concept, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so this is fairly similar to, right, where it's sort of this full integration symbolically, right? So it's
absolutely,
it's definitely not saying that Ilmatar is both a male and female figure, but has integrated the masculine and feminine.
Exactly, yeah. I don't get the idea that Ilmatar is hermaphroditic in any way.
No, but if you want to listen a little bit more to us talking about the integration of the animus and anima, episodes 7 and 8 on Grimnismal, those had some really cool things that touched on that. Just if you want to go back in our catalog and hear a bit more about that, and the obligatory reminder that we this is a part 2 of Kalevala. So yeah, if you want to check that one out too, that's also going to be a good thing. Probably should have mentioned that right off the top, but yeah, no, like this integration, and I like how this is all built. Like you certainly pointed out, where this is like you're going from the unconscious to the conscious. Now she's consciously shaping the world around her. It's that progression, right? And then the implication is that by integrating these things, integrating the masculine and feminine, whatever situation you're in, that's how you can order the world around you and kind of get it ready for whatever you have in store for your creation. Well, and isn't that also an integration too, right? That's...
Of course.
Yeah.
No, it's... the symbolism is just... It's amazing and elegant. Like, there isn't anything wasted. It's pretty... and it all plugs into each other. I'm thoroughly impressed by anyone who can actually like do that with stories. Like, it just... Wow.
No, this is the big one. I mean, for a creation story, like these are some of the most essential stories to any mythology. Is the creation story. It's not always the one that is most emphasized. Like I mean, I think most kids growing up in North America or Europe, in a Christian household, usually, I mean, like they'll be able to recite the basics of the creation of the world in Genesis. The world created in 6 days, God rests on the seventh, blah blah blah. That's a very important story though, and I mean, if you want to see that particular story really, really in detail, the symbolism of it, watch Dr. Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures. Top-notch stuff as far as analysis of the biblical stories. But my point is really just these might be some of those ones that you kind of take for granted. It's like, oh yeah, of course there's the creating the world. Yeah, good. Get to the action. But no, there's so much of that here, and I'll just reiterate from my own understanding here, not because I think you, the listener, didn't get it the first time I said it, but ordering the world around you in order so for it to be ready for what you're about to create. I think that's just the thing that was the light bulb moment for me right now. It's like you ordered the world around you for the benefit of your creation. It's like, yeah,
Yeah, no, that's huge. Like that's exactly how it's supposed to work. Well, we first saw the teal looking for a place to build a nest, which is nothing if not ordering the world around the eggs that it's going to lay. And we see that in soon to be new parents who, paint the nursery and build, buy and build the crib and all that kind of stuff, like that nesting instinct. Like we all, if you're going to have babies, like that kicks in. It's a real thing because you want to order the world and keep as much chaos out when the creation is like newborn and fragile. After a while, you actually want it to go out into the chaos and do all the chaotic things so that it can learn how to kick butt and that kind of thing. But at first, when they're that fragile, you need to have everything ordered. Like even with like putting locks on the cupboards so they can't get the Drano. Like,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, in this case, it's obviously very, very literal. And this also is putting into good relief here how the teal, the duck, was an example for Ilmatar to follow. I like that point that you made there, and I think it's clearer now that the parallel is more clear, I think. But even just on a more general level, I mean, it's not even just when you got a newborn sort of thing. It's like on a general level, you want to prepare and plan for whatever endeavor you might undertake that is venturing into the unknown sort of thing. So I really like this as just an example of no matter who you are and what you're integrating symbolically, this is a roadmap of the things you need to put together in order for you to do anything productive or creative. It's mind-blowing.
It really is.
Love when that happens.
Yeah.
I don't think I have much more here, though. It's obviously a hefty group of verses, but
For sure. No, I think we can move on because other stuff's going to come up pretty quickly and it'll be important to tie it all in.
We're not even done creation, right? Okay, back to the poem. Short one now, 280 to 288. Now the isles were formed already. In the sea, the rocks were planted. Pillars of the sky established. Lands and continents created. Rocks engraved as though with figures, and the hills were cleft with fissures. Still unborn was Väinämöinen, still unborn the bard immortal.
So we have some more creation, and it's almost like things are becoming more as we would recognize them. That there are continents now, there are rocks engraved, as though with figures, and that makes me think of of trolls actually, because you see rock formations, and those are supposed to be the trolls during the day because they turn into rock, and then at night, go searching for people to eat, and actually, I mean, I've never been to Finland, but I would imagine a lot of this would be describing things that you could readily see in Finland. And so someone hearing the story, they would recognize like, oh, she just created like where I live. Like, okay, so it's even moving it forward like in time and history so that things are becoming recognizable for the people who are hearing it and for humans in general.
Right. And I mean, I think this also parallels some of how the world would have had to have formed in general. Like, I think it's a thing where the world is a little bit less rocky, if that makes sense, earlier in its geological development, and then sort of erosion happens and it breaks down and the rocks become rockier. That's the only way I know to describe it, but like they become more, they look more like the Rocky Mountains and less like, well, maybe I'm getting this wrong. There's something to it though, the progression of things into a state that's more similar to what it was versus like long ago in the distant past, like millions and billions of years ago. The world would have been like sort of a blob, I think, and now it's formed into, land and continents and stuff like that too.
Definitely.
Right?
So I think it's called Pangea, when it was just the huge landmass that if you're to take a map today and put all the land back together, that's what it would look like. You can see how like South America nestles into Africa and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so there wouldn't have been, these rocky crags like by the ocean when it was. There would have been around the perimeter of Pangaea, but not like in between the continents as we see now. So there's just more surface area to be rocky and craggy now. So absolutely, like we're definitely seeing the transition of time and sort of into the era that we would recognize as, okay, this is where I live. That's that mountain over there kind of thing. Right.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. And the only other thing I wanted to bring up here was the pillar of the sky. So this is a really common theme, especially in European cosmology, but certainly in like kind of in general, it's a lot of places where this is kind of the model of the world, is that it's like this big snow globe sort of thing where there's this kind of covering over a flat Earth. So that's what it's supposed to be, is a flat Earth, and it's held up by a pillar at the center of the world. And in the Germanic tradition, that would have been Irminsul for the continental Germanics, and actually that's the symbol that we've got behind us here. If you look at our YouTube videos, or you see on our cover art, that's Irminsul, and it being that kind of sky pillar, it's the connection between the mundane at the earth and the sacred kind of at the top of the world. And that's sort of one reason why we chose that symbol, is it's sort of a connection to the sacred and to those old stories and a few different things like that. But and then Yggdrasil would have also been sort of in that same vein. The concept of the world tree was similar. It's not the same as the world pillar, but the concept of the world tree is almost a continuation of that, if I'm understanding that correctly. So
yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and so they had a similar idea here in the Finnic tradition, and so I just wanted to point that out, that this sky pillar thing is like, it's what exists at the center of the world that's holding it up, and it's really quite important. And so having the pillars of the sky here established is like how the sky isn't going to fall on the earth. It's important, and it's a symbol of like the sacred. And this is just, I guess, just to emphasize that this is the world in a kind of final workable form, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
And then, now we got Väinämöinen, still unborn. So you want to move on and find out what happens?
Let's do it.
Okay. Back to the poem. So this is going to be 289 to, 300, verse 300. Line 300, sorry. I keep mixing up verse and line, but it's line numbers. Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, rested in his mother's body, for the space of 30 summers and the sum of 30 winters, ever on the placid waters and upon the foaming billows. So he pondered and reflected how he could continue living in a resting place so gloomy, in a dwelling far too narrow, where he could not see the moonlight, neither could behold the sunlight.
So I guess this is our first real introduction to Väinämöinen and his first appearance as himself, and not just sort of mentioned. And I kind of see this as him like incubating in, I guess it wouldn't be primordial chaos because Ilmatar has kind of tamed it, but it is still chaos, and he's finding it gloomy and wanting to escape to see the moonlight and the sunlight. Sort of, I look at it as him wanting to step into history and into time and into existence, so that he comes away from the chaos and the potential, and instead of resting there and, I guess, building potential, he's actually now going to do something with that potential.
Right. I agree with that. And I mean, I think the thing here is that he's ready now. Like, creation is complete around him, and now it's okay to be born. Now there's actually a world out there for him to step into, and now it's like, okay, well, now this existence in my mother is no longer awesome. Like, there's nothing to do here. There's nothing to do here. Like, I think that's the emphasis, right? Like there's nothing that he can go to enact the hero's journey in the womb of his mother. Like he doesn't have a world where he can go explore and order it and create. So
exactly, there's that call for people to go out into the world and participate, and I think we're seeing Väinämöinen being antsy to get out and anxious to go out. So it's funny in other stories, like with Abraham in the Bible, God kind of has to like kick him out of the nest. But here we've got Väinämöinen looking like he doesn't need that encouragement to leave. He's like, no, I'm ready to go. Like, let me out of here.
That's a really good parallel, actually, because Abraham at that point was something like 90 years old, right? Like he was like, I'm sure I got that wrong, but he's old. He's what we would consider old.
Definitely.
And Väinämöinen. Okay, so here's one of my favorite parts here about this poem. So this is another one of those, I mentioned it before. It's not the same thing as kennings, which we have in the Norse, where it's like these words that are, symbolic of whatever character they're referring to. It's more like these patterns, these poetic patterns that are that always go together. It's like the name of someone plus the symbol of what they are, plus like this designation of what they are. And so I mentioned before, like Louhi is the mistress of Pohjola, Louhi, Pohjolan emäntä. And so here for Väinämöinen, we're going to see Väinämöinen, old and steadfast, a lot. That's actually Vaka vanha Väinämöinen. And this is a pretty darn good translation. Fairly literally, Vaka is something like steadfast or sturdy. Vanha is literally old. So Vaka vanha Väinämöinen is like his poetic name. His full poetic name is old and steadfast Väinämöinen. And already, even in the womb here, he's old. But he's old and steadfast. Like you know what you're getting with Väinämöinen. And he's very much, and this is what's interesting about Väinämöinen, and especially the parallels to Odin, where Odin is sort of this. He is the head of the pantheon. He is king god, but he's also enacting the hero's journey consistently. With Väinämöinen, I think we're going to see he's already this kind of old and steadfast guy. He's not a god per se. He's certainly more of what you would call a demigod, and the head of the pantheon is considered to absolutely be Ukko, who he refers to a lot. Like we're going to see that a lot. Already Ilmatar has done so, but Väinämöinen is certainly still not so much a symbol of kind of the old guard sort of thing, but he has those characteristics. So symbologically, he has an interesting pattern because he's going out for this hero's journey. He wants to go and do things in the world, but then at the same time, he's old and steadfast, and it's implied he's got wisdom and knowledge and all this stuff. And yeah, this really sets him up to be a fantastic, interesting character, and it's all summed up in this 3 words: Vaka vanha Väinämöinen. Väinämöinen, old and steadfast.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a great. It is a great title, I guess. Like, who wouldn't want to be old and steadfast? And I think as we go on, we'll see it more. But him resting in his mother's body for 30 summers and 30 winters, like he's basically marinating in like chaos and the potential and that kind of thing. So I can see how that would age him and give him the wisdom, so that when he finally got out, like, what can the world show him? He was just in chaos completely for 30 summers and 30 winters. So, and
the creation of the world,
and
too,
the creation
right?
of the world,
like by extension, right? So
for sure.
No, he's a fantastic character. Obviously, we're going to see tons of him, and yeah, he's just in this unique archetypal place, which again, I think we only see regularly and consistently with Odin in Norse mythology. Please, if you know of other examples that are like this, and I mean, I'm happy to hear about things that are kind of similar, but I really want to hear about, these characters that are old and steadfast, head of the pantheon somehow, whether it's sort of as this demigod role with Väinämöinen or with Odin more explicitly as the head of the pantheon, but also who go out there and perform the hero's journey and strive to do things and to create and things like that. I don't know of other traditions where that's necessarily the case, where they kind of are at the top to begin with. You know what I mean? And
For sure.
and there isn't this arc where they go from kind of the bottom up to this top position through the hero's journey. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. No, it'd be definitely interesting to find a parallel like that. So
absolutely. But for now, these two are definitely considered to be pretty close together here. So I'm ready to move on if you are.
absolutely.
Okay, back to the poem. This will be line 301 to 314. Then he spake the words which follow, and expressed his thoughts in this wise. Aid me, moon, and sun release me, and the great bear lend his counsel. Through the portal that I know not, through the unaccustomed passage, from the little nest that holds me, from a dwelling place so narrow, to the land conduct the roamer, to the open air conduct me, to behold the moon in heaven, and the splendor of the sunlight. See the great bear's stars above me, and the shining stars in heaven.
Well, that's a pretty epic way for, I guess, first words for Väinämöinen in the Kalevala. He's basically begging to be released into the world so that he can roam. And I couldn't help but wonder if they weren't drawing some parallels to like actual birth in this, where they're talking about the unaccustomed passage, the little nest that holds me being like the womb, a dwelling place so narrow. Like when I was reading, I'm like, geez, this sounds like poetically biological. And I love him asking the moon and the sun, the great bear. So he's talking about these, well, I guess heavenly bodies, these astronomical things that help people orient themselves in the world. So with the moon and the sun, you can tell time by them. You know what time of day it is, what time of night it is, when it's going to be night, and you have to sort of go hide from animals, that kind of thing. And then the Great Bear is sort of the very famous constellation Ursa Major. And oddly enough, it's one of the most important constellations like throughout the world. And for some reason, almost every other culture who recognizes Ursa Major and has it in their night sky relates it to a bear. And that to me is also weird. And, like why would that happen? And the importance of it is that you would navigate, like if you're in a ship, and I think we do see Väinämöinen piloting boats later on in other stories. It's you would do that by stars. And like it was super important for the captain to be able to read the stars in the night sky so that he could pilot at night with, nothing else to sort of guide his light. And there's actually sort of a long tradition of ideas, specifically in the West, about like stargazing and navigation. And in Plato's Republic, Socrates talks about how captains of a ship or pilots of a ship, it would be considered that they had mastered their craft or their art if they could pilot by stars, because it was just so important. But it's also, if you don't know how to do it, it's kind of mysterious. But it was so important because it oriented you, in the vastness of the ocean. So it literally gave you guidance in chaos. And so like Socrates would talk about stargazing, and there were two types that he distinguished. There's the useless stargazing, where you just look up into the sky and kind of admire it, and you might even be able to see what you're looking at and how it orients you in the world. But if you don't do anything with that knowledge, then what good is it? That's why the piloting the boat it's sort of the perfect amalgamation of the art of sailing and the knowledge of stars and where you are in the universe. And that, I mean, that's what most of this is. That's what religions are. That's what philosophies are. It's supposed to put you in the world so that you know how the world works and how you're going to interact with it. So I think it's really incredible. One that, I'm talking about Socrates and Plato, like ancient Greece type stuff, but on the other side of the Eurasian continent, we've got, this happening as well, where stargazing is also, I would assume, seen as something great, because, I mean, he's mentioning the constellation by name and how once he's able to see it, he'll know where he is, and he's in the world, and he knows where to go from there. So I thought that was, it's just a great introduction to Väinämöinen.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think you're exactly right, where it's like, this is definitely about birth, and it's semi-biological, at least to the furthest point of where they're willing to go poetically. And then it's like, yeah, there's something too. He wants to see the moon and the sun and the stars, right? Like he wants to look upward, he wants to have his head uplifted and his sight on the highest good, something like that, right? Like that's a symbol that we see all over the place, right? Oh, definitely. I mean, from stories like Pinocchio, like the movie, or I think even like Wishing on a Star, like it's that idea that that what you want in life will come from aiming to the highest good that you can find. Exactly. And I mean, that's kind of everywhere, right? And here it is. But then, let's go explore the Great Bear a little bit, because this is just one of the coolest things. And in Finnish mythology, it is just so huge. So yeah, you want to talk more about the Great Bear? Yes, I'm definitely ready to talk more about the Great Bear. It'll probably freak me out. Well, the idea of the Great Bear here, we are going to have one poem of the Kalevala Runo 46 is specifically dedicated to the bear cult, and we're going to have a fun time with that one. So stick around with us for another couple hundred episodes or something like that, and we'll actually get there. But just to give a kind of high level overview of like what this is. So the bear cult in general, worldwide, and I can go into some specifics, but worldwide is associated with one of the oldest forms of religion in prehistory. Mircea Eliade gives it a name, essentially the worship of the Lord of Wild Beasts, which is this figure that is supposedly in charge of the hunt, in charge of allowing us, humanity, to be able to effectively hunt these creatures that are used for meat, for their furs, for loads of things that were hugely important for human life. Like, I mean, that's a major source of human development, is that we started to eat meat and cook it. Importantly, those two things together were like, boom, the human brain just exploded because of those innovations, right? So hunting was one of the original things. And if you understand, hunting came well before agriculture. And in fact, the understanding of time and the seasons was known well before agriculture and before we understood the concept of, the cycle of having to put seed in the ground, wait a long while, and then it eventually comes up with things you can eat. Before that, you had hunting, and that was, between that hunting and gathering, that was how you got your meal, and it was often infrequent for this real big game. And the bear, I mean, this is like the king of the forest. It's like the big one. You don't mess with it on your own. Absolutely not. You go and take it on as a group, and it was really considered like the highest being that you could, entangle with, right? Because I mean, you can die if you have an encounter with a bear. Even today, for the most part, if you run across a bear and you don't deal with that situation very, very precisely and carefully, you could die. Well, you could die even if you're as careful as possible too, right? If you're in a bad situation to begin with. But I mean, I guess the lesson is don't be in that bad situation. But anyway, I digress. So here, the concept of the bear, and I mean, and Dan, you already hit on, like, this constellation as well, is already assimilated to the bear, but the bear was used in sacrifices the world over. An example that's commonly listed is the Ainu people from northern Japan, Hokkaido, I believe, as well as the Sakhalin Islands to the north, which is half Japan, half Russia. And the people there would have a super elaborate ritual to do with the bear, where it involves ritually killing it in a state where it's not actually like it's not sleeping. They're actively attacking the bear, sort of thing. They go drag it back to camp, skin it, and then they have this big major feast with it. And and I think with the Ainu, it might even be alive at the time, and then they shoot arrows into it or something, like, or the dead body or something like that. I'm blurring the details. I know you've read.
Yeah, I think with the Ainu, they actually had bear, like, cubs that they raised in, like, the lap of luxury until they were old enough to sort of, I guess, sacrifice in the ritual. And I mean, it sounds kind of mean, but, like, reading about it, they coddled and loved these bears and then it was almost like they were setting it free to bear heaven, kind of thing.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. That is, like, the huge point here, where by the end of this, all of this, after this feast, they would bury the bones of the bear or take it back to its cave, sort of thing, with the implication that the Lord of Wild Beast is going to resurrect it or allow its soul to go back into it. So yeah, I mean, it sounds cruel, but very much so. It was like supposed to be the continuance of this natural thing. And that's really what's important, is that it's the continuance of the cycle. And maybe a deeper point here is it's a continuance of the cycle before agriculture. And that is huge, because cyclical time, in a lot of ways, became solidified because of agriculture, because of the cycle of ground and the earth and life and death and all that was seen on a yearly basis with agriculture. But at the same time, before that, you had hunting. You had this hunting culture where, you don't want to kill all the bears to death. You want to kill a bear and then respectfully give it its space so that more bears will still be there, sort of thing. Like the point was that not to exhaust the resource. And that was the symbol of worshiping I think that's the correct term. Worshiping the Lord of Wild Beasts here is to say, like, okay, we're hunting this beast, this amazing, powerful, deadly beast, bear, what have you, but we also don't mean to be like, well, we're killing this forever. We want it to come back so that, one, it can continue to have its good life that it naturally has, but two, we can hunt it again. So,
yeah, part of a lot of the rituals in various places also included a song of, like, sorrow or apology, and just sort of, like, kind of explaining, like, that they didn't want to kill all of them, that that they were both part of the same cycle, and that's what it was, and that they weren't. Killing the bear wasn't frivolous. It wasn't for sport. It was because that's kind of the circle of life, and that it had to be done. But at the same time, like, we know what you need for your species to keep going on. We want to live in relationship. Right? Yeah. And just to talk about, like, I think we've lost that hugely in the West. I don't think there's. I think that's way out of whack.
Agreed. And that whole concept was in like the implication of the skull and the long bones of the animal, like the, I don't know the technical terms, the arms and the legs being left in a cave somewhere unbroken. The implication is that they're sacrificing the best marrow, and usually the implication as well is that the brain, which is fatty and nutrient dense, the tribe isn't eating that. They're sacrificing it back to the Lord of Wild Beasts to say, here's the best bits. It's not like we don't want it, but we want to also just continue to have bears available. So, and I mean that, like, this isn't just to say that the bear was only seen for hunting. Like, it was a symbol of power. It was like the deadliest thing around. Like, it could kill you if there's a bear on the loose. I mean, even today, if there's like a problem bear out in the wilderness that's like coming into contact with humans regularly and is no longer afraid, like, unfortunately, the solution is to put it down, because it's going to kill someone eventually.
Definitely. They're also a sign of like fertility, because you often would see like the mother bear with her cubs. So, and there's usually, one or two, like, I don't know. It's definitely a powerful symbol. And you might ask yourself, like, well, why the bear? But if you've actually ever seen a bear up close, they are actually majestic creatures. And in a lot of cases, we'd be talking about like cave bears, which are bigger than most of the bears we have today. And I mean, they're terrifying animals. I remember being in a national park and seeing a bear, sort of wandering around eating stuff by the side of the road. Not garbage. It was like just eating whatever bears eat. I think they eat whatever they want. But some guy had gotten out of his car and to take a picture, and he got closer to the bear than he was to his own car. And I just remember thinking, like, okay, you're dead. If this bear decides that you're dead, because you're not going to make it back to your car, because they're deceptively fast. And then like one swipe and you're on the ground. Like you can't fight a bear barehanded.
No, that's crazy. That's actually like, at worst, that's ignorance. No, at best, that's what I meant. At best, that's ignorance, because that's like, no, you don't tempt that. And that's almost the whole point of all this. The bear being this most powerful thing. It's like, I do not think you would see someone from a culture like this who respected, and I think loved is not even too harsh, like too strong of a word here. Loved the bear as well, almost essentially the same level as a god would go and tempt it like that.
Absolutely, because we see in the cultures that were like raising the bears from being cubs, like they were treated very well and basically pampered until it was time for the sacrifice. Otherwise, if they were going out and hunting, they went in a huge party. And then when they went into the cave, they woke the bear up. Like, it'd be a lot easier to kill the bear while it's sleeping. But no, they were showing it that respect that, here's the kind of, you've got a chance to do some damage and maybe escape. And I'm sure that like there were hunts where, people didn't come back.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, just to bring this all back in here, because we've been talking sort of more about a bear cult abstractly, but on the level of the Finnic peoples in general, like this was central to their mythology, and they had similar rituals as well. And I believe one of the main aspects of this is they would have sort of a ritual marriage as well, which is sort of to merge the spirit of the bear with that of the tribe and things like that. So I mean, this was central to their mythology, and so the great bear being mentioned with the sun and the moon, like these are the two main things for telling time, right? But then the bear is also there as not only the symbol of the stars, but also like just the symbol of the bear, which is just central. And there's a Finnish, I don't know what you would call him, I guess sort of mythologist or something like that, named Juha Pentikäinen, and he wants to go through the existing corpus of Finnish poems, which the Kalevala, again, is only a small fraction, and they have tons of these available in their archives, and he wants to collect essentially a new Kalevala, which is centered around the bear. And this is really all just to say that you can take the bear symbolism and compare it to like the creation of the world from the perspective of the creation of the bear, all the way down to all the cycles of the world as being through the lens of this being a bear cult, for lack of a better term. And it's just really to emphasize that for the Finnish peoples here, this was like their thing. The bear was their symbol.
Yeah, like according to this gentleman, if you're to take out or sort of filter out the Christianity that Elias put into it, you would actually end up with sort of something that looked like a bear cult. So,
yeah, it's really interesting, and I believe it was something like 2015 was the last I saw anything published about this. But if Mr. Penttikainen comes out with his bear version of the Kalevala, that's next on our list. Absolutely.
Definitely.
So no, just to say here, I mean, this is an introduction to a massive symbol, and really, like when we get to number 46, oh man, like that's going to be a cool time. That's going to be so much fun, that particular verse. So it's gonna take a long time, but it's gonna be worth it. I think it's the story that I'm currently most looking forward to. But that's probably just because I've been reading about bears and stuff all last week. So
Definitely.
But there we go. Väinämöinen wants to be born, see the sun, moon, and the great bear. You ready to move on?
I think so, yeah.
All right. Back to the poem, and we're going to finish it off now, actually. So this is 315 to 344, the end. Back to the poem. When the moon no freedom gave him, neither did the sun release him. Then he wearied of existence, and his life became a burden. Thereupon he moved the portal, with his finger fourth in number, opened quick the bony gateway, with the toes upon his left foot, with the nails beyond the threshold, with his knees beyond the gateway. Headlong in the water falling, with his hands the waves repelling, thus the man remained in ocean, and the hero on the billows. In the sea 5 years he sojourned, waited 5 years, waited 6 years, 7 years also, even 8 years on the surface of the ocean by a nameless promontory, near a barren, treeless country. On the land his knees he planted, and upon his arms he rested, rose that he might view the moonbeams, and enjoy the pleasant sunlight. See the great bear's stars above him, and the shining stars in heaven. Thus was ancient Väinämöinen, he, the ever-famous minstrel, born of the divine creatrix, born of Ilmatar, his mother.
And that's the end of Runo 1. So we have Väinämöinen being born, and I kind of see him when he's born headlong into water falling, and it just made me think of actually like childhood and how chaotic that is, because you're really orienting yourself when you're a child. The most of like what you know in the world is sort of in relation to your parents, and as long as your parents are there, like you kind of have it figured out. Like, okay, they've got this world figured out, so I'm just going to do what they say, and then it'll be fine. But then as you grow up, then you can sort of orient yourself in the world and sort of figure out what's going on. But until then, you're kind of just on the surface of the ocean. And I guess in some ways we've got Ilmatar, I guess maybe even keeping him on the surface rather than pulling him down into the ocean as you might expect. But then he goes on to land into created space, ordered space, and he's able to see moonbeams and pleasant sunlight. So like in this ordered space, you now have time and all that means, and sort of the civilization that brings with it. And then you have the Great Bear stars above him again. So like navigation and starting you're not even just surviving now, you're now able to, you know, look at the greatest good and aim for it. And we actually kind of leave it there as the, you know, what is Väinämöinen doing next after he's been born and in the world? Well, he's looking at the moonbeams and the sunlight and the stars above him shining in heaven, and then we sort of now he's ready to go off and have his many adventures.
Yeah, exactly. No, I went to the exact same place. This is like childhood. You know, there's the birth, and I mean that's explained in pretty great detail here. But then it's like, yeah, he's in the water, and I think that's the potential of childhood. That's like, I mean, okay, so you can seriously screw up a kid if you don't make sure that its development proceeds along, you know, what's best for it, he, she, whatever. You know, if you don't get your kid socialized by 4 or something like that, or maybe I'm even like, if you don't get your kid socialized by 2 to the level of a 2-year-old, then it's never going to get to the level of a 4-year-old by the time it's 4 or something like that. Like, there's some serious pressure on a parent as far as making sure your kid develops properly. And there's that potential to go pretty much anywhere. And I think sort of saying that he's on the waters for however much time, you know, 8 years here in this case, but it's like, I think that almost says that it points to there being a fair amount of nurture as being a part of development. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like in the constant nature versus nurture thing, like, I mean, I think the answer is probably going to end up being somewhere in the middle. You know, like you've got what nature gave you, but then you've also got whatever whatever was around you for your childhood, what was set up. You know, again, going back to with Ilmatar, like how well she ordered the world, sort of thing. Like, I think it all ties back there, and then symbolically, yeah, like as a symbol of childhood, like I really like that there. So
absolutely, yeah. I'm just thinking about how easy it is to screw up kids. Like if you don't touch them enough, they get all weird. And was it Russia or Ukraine?
Romania.
Romania, where we've talked about this before, where, you know, babies weren't touched when they were like newborns and they died because they were being fed and everything else. They just weren't being touched, and so they died. I think it was an orphanage or...
Yeah, it was an orphanage. Yeah, like in the communist regime and everything like that. And there was just so many babies that were being abandoned. I think they had some kind of like really, really draconian, like you have to make a lot of kids, but then tons of them were getting abandoned because the families couldn't support them, sort of thing. And yeah, something like that. For
sure. So there's just... I mean, that's just one way of screwing up a kid, but there's countless ways. And in fact, I mean, there are no perfect parents, so that everyone screws up their kid somehow. It's just sort of how you deal with it and to what degree. But yeah, because I don't want to make anyone feel bad for screwing up your kids. It's like, yeah, you're going to screw up your kids. We're all screwed up. But there are degrees, and you know, I don't know. There is that dichotomy between nature and nurture. And I'm not sure why there has to be. I think you can sort of nurture the nature and direct it into the sort of the proper ways so that, you know, you're not just a maniac by the time you're, you know, an adult and doing whatever you want and too strong to stop. Like, especially with men, that's often the case where they're, you know, messed up as kids, and then no one kind of gets them back on the path before they're strong enough to like do some serious damage. So,
well, yeah. And then the flip side, I think, right, to screwing up your kids is that there's also that potential for greatness. And I think that's the other side of it too, right? Is that here's this potential for this great figure to emerge. And you know, obviously that's going to happen. Right. And so it's optimistic, but not everyone's going to get there. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
No, so I mean, well, I really like this as a symbol, though, and I think just now was kind of where it seemed more clear. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
As a symbol for childhood, but then it's sort of like, then he's done being in this chaos on the ocean. I don't think that implies completeness, but that's still sort of like, now you're ready to go out and face the world, the ordered world, like the world as it exists now, and then maybe you can make your mark on it, something like that.
Yeah, I almost see it kind of as consciousness again, where it seems that, if we're looking at consciousness as one of the symbols in it, that when land is established, that is sort of a sign that some level of consciousness has been reached and that the person is no longer unconscious. Because when Ilmatar, I would say when she became more conscious was when she was creating land and that kind of thing too. So yeah, no, there's a lot of, I guess, symbols of like development of people and humans in this, in this particular part, in the whole poem, and this in particular part. So
yeah, definitely agreed. And I think with that here, yeah, Väinämöinen is going to go out onto the land, a barren, treeless country. I think that's a little bit of foreshadowing here. So, for when we come back to Runo 2, we're going to go back to the Poetic Edda again, and just so I think we're done. I think we're closing the book on this one, right?
Yeah. Yep, I'm good with that.
Yep, and we're gonna go back to the Poetic Edda next time here. So that's going to be the next episode coming up. We're going to go on to the next story. So that's going to be Skirnismal, I believe, and then we're going to continue on with our series on the Havamal as well, because we don't want to neglect that. But then we're going to come back to the Kalevala and pick up where we left off on Runo 2. So we've all got that to look forward to. And I've already really enjoyed digging into this so far. So
definitely, I'm really glad that it's going to be in our regular rotation, that it's going to be like a mainstay, that we'll be coming back to it, because I could spend a lot of time in the land of the heroes.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. So hope to have you along with us the whole way. It's definitely the beginning of a long journey, but it's really exciting. So, and with that, I think that's pretty much everything for us here for tonight. So I think we can finish up with our usual acknowledgements. And so we'd be remiss if we didn't thank Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's absolutely the inspiration for this show, especially his university lectures, his maps of meaning, his biblical lecture series as well, all that stuff, all of his work on myth and mythology and story structure and archetypes. That's huge inspiration for us here, and really inspired us to dig into kind of another group of stories to see if we can find some meaning for everyday life in that. And so we thank him for that. We'll definitely put a link to his YouTube channel, which is just a fantastic channel, great resource, and specifically his university lectures and biblical series would highly recommend them if you've enjoyed our show, and as well as to his list of recommended books to read, because that's going to take you a very long time if you want to read everything on that list. So lots of great books there.
Absolutely. And you will definitely notice changes in how you look at the world after you're done reading some of them. So it's definitely worthwhile.
Agreed. And I think other than that, I just want to say a big thank you in general to Elias Lönnrot for all this, because this has just been fantastic.
Absolutely. No, he's like one of my new heroes now. Like he's pretty awesome.
Exactly. And W.F. Kirby's translation as well is fantastic. So we will post a link there to an Amazon link for a free Kindle version, at least free at the time of recording anyway here. So you can follow along with us if you like. And I think that's about it. So please do, if you enjoyed this episode, it would be a big help for us if you wouldn't mind giving us a rating on iTunes or your podcast app of choice, or even Facebook if you like. And speaking of that, please do come find us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Northern Myths on Twitter, Facebook. Those are our main pages. At Northern Myths Podcast on Instagram. And we're also both personally on Twitter, North Myth Luke and North Myth Dan. So come find us, connect with us. We definitely love talking to you. If you've enjoyed our show and you have some comments, please do feel free to tell us where we're wrong. Certainly happy to admit our mistakes, but also to have a conversation about the things we don't know as much about. We're certainly no experts. We're learning here along with you as well. So that's just a whole big part of the journey. So
absolutely, I know. I could read this on my own, and learn quite a bit, but it's not until we actually like get here to sit down and do the podcast. That's where like the real learning and magic happens for me. So yeah, no, it's kind of fun to be able to do it in front of people and then have other people's input as well, so that my mind can be blown again and again.
Well, exactly. So please do find us on social media, and it's always a big help if you can subscribe and share, and check out our YouTube channel as well. We're doing some good things with the YouTube channel. We've been doing a little bit less with the clips and stuff there lately, but we do plan to get back into that. And of course, we got our Wednesday wisdom out of the hive them all there. So check us out there on YouTube as well. And, a subscribe would be a big help on that there too. So I think with that, we're going to leave you with the words of wisdom from Carl Jung, a paraphrase anyway, from Carl Jung. He was always big about finding out what myth you're living, because if you know what myth you're living, maybe you understand a little bit more about your story and how it might end in the future. So yeah, I encourage you to go out and find out what myth you're living and see what that means for you and for your life. And so with that, this has been the Northern Myths Podcast. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.